our choice webinar for the DC Action. This is a student leader webinar. My name is Victoria Fernandez. I am part of the escalation support team for the Divestment Student Network. I just graduated from UC Berkeley, and I am currently in California.
Hi, I'm Julia Berkman Hill. I'm a junior at Bowdoin College. I'm organizing with Bowdoin Climate Action on their on our divestment campaign, and I'll be heading down to DC. All of our people are here.
Awesome. So the goals of this webinar are to put into context why this action is important and do some storytelling from a escalation core school, which is Bowdoin, that Julia is a part of, and provide some tools and do a mini training on an act, recruit, train cycle so that other folks who are watching this webinar can find out how to use this tool to integrate this action in DC into their campaign strategy. So I'm going to do a little bit of framing about the action, and the action is hugely important because it's it will be one of the largest ever civil disobedience for racial, climate, and migrant justice, and the partners are many different movements made up of young people, and it's a really important action for our movement to engage in because it's one that we haven't engaged in such an intersectional way before on this scale in our nation's capital. And the premise is that in Washington, young people are taking to the streets to demand that we keep fossil fuels in the ground and protect the lives of Black and brown and poor communities, and while reinvesting in healthy jobs, renewable energy, and an economy that works for all of us. And with the fossil fuel industry continuing to hold our politicians captive, politicians aren't moving on this, and they're throwing away billions of dollars incarcerating people, deporting mothers and fathers and parents, and polluting our people and our planet. And so this action is significant because it's a time where we can take direct action and demand that our country invest in the things that we care about and the things that are affecting our lives, and to help our communities thrive. And so we know that we are the ones that we've been waiting for, and that we are the ones that are going to take action and make our political leaders accountable to the vision that we hold for ourselves. So, that being said, Julia is going to talk a little bit about what Bowdoin Climate Action is doing in relation to this significant action.
Awesome. Thanks, Victoria. I'm really excited about DC. It's going to be great. And it really fits in well with everything that we've been up to this semester so far. One of our goals for this year was really to engage as much as we can in the political process and figure out ways that we can bring our work on divestment into the broader national political Clinton in Portland, Maine. There, and we actually interrupted her her speech when she began to talk about climate change. We held up signs that said, "I'm ready for Hillary to say no to KXL," because, yeah, I'm sorry, I may have just cut out and my internet is going in and out, so I apologize if that happens again. But basically what happened was at that point, Hillary was the only presidential candidate that hadn't taken a stand on the pipeline, and it was a pretty glaring absence. And we asked her, just like people had been asking her all summer long, about her position on the pipeline. So we had these signs, and she told us to sit down. and we didn't sit down. And our fearless leader, Allison Gross, said, Secretary Clinton, what's your position on Keystone? And she said, I'm not going to tell you today, and you should just, if that's what you're here for, you're not going to get an answer. So we went to the back of the room, and we started talking to media. And we started talking about how she was the only one who hadn't taken a position, how her climate plan was only halfway there, and that she really needed to take a stand on climate justice. And then 5 days later, she actually came out against the pipeline in Iowa when another student organizer, or not interrupted, asked her a question at a Q&A. And she said, yeah, I'm against the pipeline. And since then, she's also said that we should keep she said that she thinks we shouldn't be burning as much fossil fuels, and she's really turned around in a lot of ways because of all of the pressure from young organizers in New Hampshire, in Maine, in Iowa, in all the states that she's been going to. And that was a really huge victory for us and for everyone that's been working so hard on this. Shout out to Young Jung and her team in New Hampshire. But I think that really is a good example of how movements can shape the debate at a national level. And I mean, another great example is the protesters affiliated with Black Lives Matter who've been interrupting Bernie Sanders and other political candidates in the past, and demanding leadership. And because of that, he came out with a racial justice platform, essentially. And both of those examples, there's tons of other ones, but point to the ways that young people can really be a part of the presidential election, not just by voting, but by saying what matters to them and by thinking about ways to really demand leadership from candidates who may otherwise not take a stand on the issues that are important to us. And so DC is another way to do that, and I think that it's really, really important that it's this intersectional action where we're coming together not just with other organizers working on climate justice, but also on racial justice, also on migrant justice, and thinking about the ways that we're all really working towards the same goals, which is to have justice on all of these issues and to really have a political system that's working for our movements and for our young people, which is why the action is called Our Generation, Our Choice. This is really about standing up and realizing that, as Victoria said, that we are the ones that we've been waiting for. We need to make this happen because no one else will, and that we really do have power to change things as long as we take it. So I think that the ways that we've engaged so far with the political process really fit in with what this action's all about. And then bringing that home to divestment too, right? It's not just about the presidential election, but it's also about ways that you can mobilize power within your community. So I'm a student, that's where I have power to organize, and my institution happens to have social clout as a elite liberal arts school, and so I can use that power and use that influence that my institution has to demand leadership, not just from my presidential candidates, but also from my school, the institution where I attend, and that's heavily invested in the fossil fuel industry. And so I think that's the way that you can frame this to connect back to your divestment campaign or whatever campaign you're working on, is bringing this momentum from DC and mobilizing your student base, which is where you have the capacity to actually affect change. And divestment is a tactic, so it's not just about actually shifting the money, but the social change that comes with that and stigmatizing the fossil fuel industry. And the fossil fuel industry is really has such a stranglehold on our political system that those things also work together, right? Where if we can get students at Bowdoin to hate the fossil fuel industry, that's one step towards like lessening that power and like being able to isolate them from our broader political system and like the social influence that they have right now. Um, so that's why I'm excited about DC, and that's how I'm framing it on my campus.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia. And just to let everyone who's watching know, you can submit questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag WebWorkshop. So we will leave some time at the end to kind of answer those. So thanks, Julia, for talking about why that this action is important for your campaigns. And we are going to go into a quick little mini training on an act recruit train cycle, which is a way to think about how we can absorb the momentum that is built up around this DC action, like Julia said, and make sure that we absorb that momentum into our campaigns looking forward. So not just, trying to turn out people to this action, but also figuring out a way to engage students after that. So I'm going to share my screen and look at some little pictures that I drew. So here we go. So this is a graph with engagement, or the number of people that are either active in your campaign or taking action for your campaign and over time. So I'm going to tell you a story about an action that happened on my campus, UC Berkeley, last year. So we started with 20 people, and that was kind of our core. And we had this awesome action called the Night March, and we turned out 100 people to march around the freshman dorms, and we had huge banners and art, and went through our student government senate meeting and got a lot of attention, and it was a really fun time, and we had music and people were banging on pots and pans, and it was fabulous. But then the next week, we never saw any of those people again, and we were sad. And so we had this problem with absorption and retention because we were at the same exact place where we started, a day before after our action. Now we're going to, so that was an example of absorption not really happening at all. Now we're going to talk about what it looks like, hopefully, to go through an act recruit train cycle that is successfully absorbs some of the people that you get to turn out to the action in the first place. So in an ideal situation, we would have recruited all of these people to come to our action, and then we would have recruited them in some way. So we were handing out flyers and having people sign up on clipboards and things like that, and inviting them to a training, which of course there's a little bit of drop off because number one, you can't recruit everyone that goes to your action, but number two, there are probably going to be a little bit less people at your actual training that you invite people to. But the idea of engaging and inviting them to a training is that they are re-engaged directly after they take action for your campaign. So there's not like this might be, the next week. This training might be the next week after your larger action, and it gives folks time to, sort of rest a little bit from the action that they went to, but also stay engaged and learn more about the campaign, because sometimes folks go to actions, but they don't really know the full details. So then after this happens, after you've acted and you've recruited folks and then you've, really tried to engage them by training them, that sets you up really nicely to then do another action that you turn out even more people than you did at first. So in also the ideal world, you would have trained a bunch of folks, retained them, and then been able to call upon more folks to take action as time goes on. And then for that action, again, we kind of go through this act, recruit, train cycle, knowing that, we're going to lose maybe 20% of them, or, even in some cases more. But really thinking about our strategy and the ways that we engage in these act, recruit, train cycles. So knowing that it's going to oscillate a little bit, but growing more and more. So we can even think of it as going further, and where more our engagement is more at like 200 folks that are starting to turn out to our actions. And it's really important so that our campaigns can continue to grow and build power and hold folks accountable that need to be held accountable. So I'm going to pass it back to Julia to have her talk a little bit about Bowden's plan for doing that.
Sweet. And I don't know if this was mentioned before, forgive me if it was, but y'all who are watching can also, you'll have a chance to ask questions later using the hashtag OGOC Webchat on Twitter. So Bowden's plan is that we have our general meetings on Monday nights. So at our last general meeting, we had a little mini training on recruitment. And so we're trying to get, I think our goal is like around 30 kids to go down to DC. It's a long way. It's like a 10-hour drive or so. So like we got 110 people to go to People's Climate March, but we're probably not going to get that this time, especially since we only have like a couple of weeks. But we definitely want like, oh yeah, awesome. So maybe like around 30 or so. So we had a bunch of people at our meeting, and we went through what to say to people. We framed the action like Victoria started out with at the beginning of this web chat, and then we formed 2 lines, and we had people practice in pairs of like recruiting their friends to come to the action and telling their friends like, why they're super hyped about going and what it's all about. And so that way we have, especially our first years who are new to the campaign, gaining skills and also recruiting people that like I personally don't have access to, that I'm not friends with, and so we can broaden our ability to recruit that way. So we were training people on how to recruit, then recruiting for an action, and then once we go to DC, there'll be trainings there, and then coming back, we're going to be recruiting for another like action-ish thing, which is going to be a film screening. So for New Economy Week, we're going to be screening This Changes Everything, the Naomi Klein film based off of her book. It's a documentary, and we're going to be screening that and then talking about basically debriefing the action in DC and telling that story and why it matters to our campaign and having a discussion around that. And that's going to be like 3 or 4 days after we get back from DC. So that's good, for people who went to DC and are looking for ways to get more engaged in our campaign or just like be more involved on campus, but also for people, because DC is such a big commitment, people are missing class and stuff. So when we're recruiting for DC, if people are like, oh man, that sounds awesome, but like I have a game this weekend, or like I have a lab on Monday, they can still come and hear about what we did there and hear about the ways that climate change is connected to our economy and our political system, and they can really get engaged. So that's kind of the deal. And then we're going to have like another training at our next Monday meeting, and so we're going to continue that cycle, right? And we're probably going to have another action in December. So hopefully now that like our membership who've been coming to the meetings and like getting these skills on how to recruit and how to absorb momentum from events and how to frame frame and like tell good stories. Hopefully then like for our next action we'll be able to turn out more people because those people will be engaged and will have like the hard skills on like how to actually do that. So that's our plan.
Nice, totally. Thanks, Julia, for mentioning the skills, because I think the one of the big parts about training and that keeps folks engaged is that they're getting those hard skills in the training, but they're also building relationships with folks in the campaign, and the folks that are training them. So I am going to share again because I drew another picture, and we're going to talk about an example that didn't exactly follow like a perfect ACRECruit train cycle, but did work pretty well. So this is an example from Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, and this is, so okay, something got a little bit cut off, but they started with 20 folks. This is last year for the People's Climate March. It's kind of similar to the DC action in that, you know, it's a big, huge climate action that is happening on the East Coast and is a really good way to plug in. So what folks did was they turned out 200 people to the People's Climate March from Swarthmore, from their college. And they were like, great, that's awesome. Then what they did was recruited on the bus. They handed out flyers on the bus on the ride home and invited them to a training the next week. So they got 50 people at the training the week after. And even though this seems like kind of a big, huge dip in what they've got, it's actually really great because now they have 30 more students engaged and being trained on divestment than they had before. So even though it's not looking like this perfect ACRECruit train cycle where you're only going down by a little bit, they are still retaining a bunch of folks and increasing their base size. The next thing that they did was 6 weeks later, they had a press conference. So another opportunity for folks to act, and they had 50 students turn out to that, which was great. And then there are a little bit of recruit and train steps that we missed right here because I'm not quite sure the numbers, but they did, they did more recruitment and they trained more students. And in December of that same year, they had an action at a board meeting, and they got 100 students to show up to that board meeting. So even though it didn't look perfectly like this kind of oscillating upward cycle, they did follow this ACRECruit train model in that they recruited a bunch of folks, or they turned out a bunch of folks, recruited them, trained them, and are generally moving upwards in their base and how many folks are trained and how many folks are taking action. And I think one of the exciting parts about this example also is that People's Climate March was a really huge event where, it is a big commitment in that folks had to, take their weekend and go do something. But, it was kind of for climate justice generally and wasn't exactly for divestment. And then, like a month later or a couple months later, they had a board meeting where 100 students turned out just straight up for divestment or just straight up for whatever campaign you're working on. And so I think that is something that is particularly powerful in this ACRECruit train cycle. The training can really give folks that analysis and those hard skills to make sure that they're engaging in whatever campaign that you're running. So that is sort of the conclusion of the content of our webinar. And I'm wondering if we have any questions.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello, Emily. Emily is our awesome 350 fracking digital campaigner who is helping us out with the webinar tonight. So thank you, Emily.
You're welcome. So we have one question so far. What do I do if I'm not leading a contingent to the DC action but want to be a part of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So being from California, often I felt like campaigns on the West Coast don't really know like what we should be doing when there's a big, huge West Coast or East Coast action. For People's Climate March, there was so much buzz around it that some folks definitely went. But in this case, it's sort of unclear. So one thing that folks can do definitely is have a solidarity action. So if you all have the capacity to have an action that either has the same messaging or is in solidarity with the Our Generation, Our Choice action, then people can use that as an action that they can then run the Act, Recruit, Train cycle off of. Julia mentioned the This Changes Everything movie screenings. If y'all don't have huge capacity to put on some sort of direct action or rally, then you could use the This Changes Everything screening as an event that you can turn people out to and then recruit and train from there. So those are like some ideas for engagement with this if you're not doing a lot of fundraising and sending folks on planes and things like that. Julia, did you have anything else that you wanted to answer that question with? Or?
I mean, yeah, I think both of those things are exactly what I would say. Any way that you can kind of generate hype on your campus or wherever you're organizing from. So sharing things on social media, writing an op-ed. There's lots of like lesser, like instead of turning people out if you don't feel like you have the capacity for that, there's still ways of being like, this amazing thing's happening. So yeah, those are some other ideas.
Totally.
Awesome. Let me check one more time. If you have any questions, you can tweet Web Workshop or OGOC Webchat, and we will check on those. Let me see. Oh, yeah, it looks like we have one more. So can you tell us a little bit about what to expect at the trainings during the event, and maybe a little bit of details about the event logistics and plan itself? Or maybe that's not you guys, but if you could just talk about that for a little bit.
I can say what I know, which I think that a lot of like little details are still being hammered out. But the schedule that I told my campaign the other day was that there's going to be trainings on Saturday afternoon and evening, mostly for folks that are based in DC, and then on Sunday for out-of-town folks. The morning on Sunday is going to be some stuff actually like we're covering in the webinar about like how to bring this momentum back to your campaign and tell good stories about it. There's going to be different panels because this is intersectional, so it's not just going to be like trainings run by 350 and like climate justice organizers, but also other campaigns for racial justice and migrant justice. So I don't know the details of those at all. What I do know is the big thing that everyone has to go to on Sunday is the civil disobedience training. So that's kind of like mandatory for people that are participating, and then the action itself is on Monday. And it's around the White House. I don't have like specifics for you in terms of the action plan, but it'll be in the morning on Monday.
Awesome. We have one more that I see. So what kinds of trainings can we do in the ART cycle, Action, Recruit, Train cycle?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a lot of times there are many different types of trainings that you can do, obviously, and I think it depends on like we wouldn't probably want to do a lot of stake or uh, like master's house or like anti-oppression trainings in a training in like an art act recruit train cycle, because those are a little bit more advanced. The types of trainings that you might want to do are like practicing how to talk about divestment, like talking about narrative strategy and how to tell stories. Maybe doing like hassle lines, which is like where two people face each other and they get like 30 seconds to kind of do a quick spiel about divestment. So more intro things like that, spectrum of allies, if folks know what that is, which is like showing and learning about how divestment polarizes the public, or how you can use that tool to track support for divestment on your campus and look at, where neutrals are, where passive allies are, where passive opponents are, and things. So more campaign strategy intro trainings, I think, would be good and ideal to engage folks with. Yeah, I'll pass it to Julia if you want to add anything too.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we're planning. I think we've done, like earlier in the semester, we did Spectrum of Allies. We did kind of like the 2 lines practicing for recruiting people to DC, but we want to like bring that back to divestment as well. I think even just like talking about the ways that DC relates to divestment or whatever campaign you're organizing for. Yeah, like hard skills would be good.
Cool. So this question is from Chewy or Ian. What is the end goal of this action? Changing opinions in Congress? Question mark.
You want to take that, Julie?
Sure. So this action is exactly 1 year out from the presidential election in 2016. So, like, in terms of a political target, that would be our presidential candidates, and demanding leadership from them on the issues that matter to us, which in this case are climate justice, racial justice, and migrant justice. It's also kind of like internally the goal is to have like more like, I mean, it's an intersectionality, like solidarity action where like a goal is to unite these movements together and really talk about that. And then in terms of like also the public is a target, and the action is going to be disrupting like traffic and like normal business, and so that is going to be like directly confronting the public with like this huge display of power. So there's like multiple levels on which it targets things, but I would say like in terms of a political target, it would be the presidential candidates and like the office that represents.
Totally, yeah. I would say just add to add kind of quick to that is just to get folks and students like comfortable and having a little bit more experience with doing things that are raising tension with direct action. Some folks maybe have never been part of direct action before, and I think we're always trying to ramp up people's level of feeling comfortable with raising tension and disrupting the status quo. So.
Awesome. So this question is from Donna, asking, is there a particular framework you use for building the skill of telling good stories?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, that's a really good question. So there are a lot of different like activities that folks can do for telling good stories, but I think the main things are that it's important to be concise, and it's important to have an arc in your story, and and characters as well. Wow, actually, and conflict. Okay, so it's kind of, if you can pretend like you're telling a fairy tale story, and you're only allowed to have like 5 sentences, and the first one starts as once upon a time, and then the last one and the last sentence is or it ends with, and they all lived happily ever after. So like, let's say, once upon a time the fossil fuel industry was acting recklessly and was destroying the planet, and college students knew that this was happening, and that their institutions were directly invested in those industries, and decided to take a stand. Students engaged in direct action to pressure their universities to take their investments out of the fossil fuel industry, which led to restrictive legislation nationally and internationally, and they all lived happily ever after. So there were kind of some like main characters in there, like villain and kind of super people or whatever, activists, organizers. A conflict, which is like that there's this climate crisis, and fossil fuel companies are exacerbating it. But then, that we see in our storytelling where we're going and where we want to end up, and like know exactly how we're going to frame something as a victory. So those are sort of the elements that I would say are important when doing storytelling, because and I'm super excited about this question, because storytelling is such a big part of what we do as organizers, and the stories that we're telling in the media are the ways that we claim victory. And we have to really tell our own story, because no one else is going to tell it for us, and that's how we win and change public opinion. So it's exciting. Julia, did you think of or want to add anything more to that?
Not particularly. I think that makes a lot of sense. I actually haven't ever led a training on storytelling, but I think that would be a great thing to bring back to my campaign. Something we always do is just start off with a story of self. So someone who's taken leadership in our campaign will tell about like what their stake is in this work, and why they work on divestment, why they fight for climate justice. And then something you can do after that is have people say what resonated with them. And I think that I've never also, I don't think I've ever been trained necessarily on storytelling, and I think it's something that often you kind of pick up by hearing others do their storytelling. So you could even like have an action where people like tell their own stories of self or something like that.
Totally. And yeah, I can. So some of the stuff that I was drawing on is from the Center for Story-Based Strategy. So they're at www.storybasedstrategy.org, and they have a lot of helpful tools, like the one that I just went through a little bit, the fairy tale, on how to do storytelling and narrative strategy, which is what that's called. Fancy terminology. If we don't have any more questions, I think we will wrap up. Emily, how are we doing on questions?
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up.
Okay. Thanks. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Julia, for being on. And thanks for those folks who are listening. And if you want more info, go ahead and paste in the Facebook event group, or if you want more access to resources or trainings, some things that we hit on, we would love to hear from you. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Bye, guys. Thanks.